We are on page 10 of the Mishnah. There are two different entities that we dealt yesterday and the day before yesterday. One is called muktzeh and the other is hachana. Meaning, we explained that there are many different kinds of muktzeh, meaning something that's set aside, we need to have it prepared in advance. Hachana, meaning if you set it up in advance before the holiday, then it's a different story, otherwise you set it aside. Now, we dealt yesterday with the situation with the dove, meaning you have a dove cove, which is one of those that people, especially in those days, have, but today even people who live in a farmland, they still have things like that, and we can derive a lot of halachot of Yom Tov, of the holidays, from that, which is, if a person needs food for Simchat Yom Tov, for the celebration of the holiday, you're allowed to do it during Yom Tov as well. So the question we have in the previous Mishnah, what happens if a person needs something during Yom Tov, while the question is, if it was not prepared in advance, is that okay or not? Why? Because in general, the dove are muktzeh, are set aside, and you cannot carry and use them during the holidays. So we differentiate between doves that you raised in your yard, which means that this is something you have the same as the chicken that was designated to lay eggs, versus those who are over there out in the dove cove, and by trying to get them, you are in violation of tzeidah, which means you're hunting during the holidays in order to get them. So we differentiate between those who are out there, out in the field, out, or those who are there for the purpose of food. So the best way is called hachana, which means we're preparing in advance for use in a holiday day in advance, which is in the Erev Yom Tov, the eve of the holiday, person designated them. So here you see the disputation again between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai omrim lo yitol ela im ken ni'anea mibod yom. Beit Shammai said a person should not take the dove from the dove cove during the festival, only if he move them, meaning shaking them in advance, which means you go there for the sake of just understanding. Imagine a dove cove outside of his house. There are several windows or several rooms, small tiny rooms, and he goes and he said room B with doves there. He opened and he touched them and he said, this one I'm going to use tomorrow for the festival. So that circumstance, Beit Shammai said that that's fine. In other words, according to Beit Shammai, it's not enough to say, I want the pair dove in the section B. That's not sufficient. You need to physically move them and say, these are mine for tomorrow. Versus Beit Hillel omrim. Beit Hillel disagree, and they hold omed ve'omer ze v'ze ani notel, which means he's standing in a distance, and he said, this section B, for example, it's for the purpose of using for the holiday, for tomorrow, for Yom Tov, and by doing so, the Meir explained, that's basically done, and you do not need to touch those doves in advance. Now we elaborate on that. Amar Rav Chanan bar Ami machloket bivrecha rishona. So here, just a word of introduction. You have a pair. Usually what happens with the dove, they have those nests, and they have every month 2 eggs. They lay 2 eggs each month, one a male and one is female, excluding the winter's time, which is in our times, let's say the months of winter, like February, January, etc. Over there it's the month from Tevet to Nisan, and they do not have they not lay eggs at that time. So someone wants to see that the dove cove is successful, he not touch the first pair that laid out, because he wants to give them, in our language, in modern days, they understand more and more and more that the animals have their own mind and reflection and psychological reaction. So the first one you leave there. So the first one, it's called in the Talmudic language breicha, which means the first pair that comes out of the dove. One is a male and one is a female. This one, you leave it there, so you give the comfort zoning for those doves, and then you take the rest. So that's, the Rashi tells us that that's basically give the comfort, and then the last, what come after the first month, you can take for the purpose of shchita. The Beit Shammai savrei gazrinan dilma ate leim luchei. So Beit Shammai hold, look, you have to touch them before the holidays.
Rabbi, just before we get too much further, I'm missing something in the Mishnah. I don't see the machloket between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel.
Okay, so
because they're both saying, they're both saying that you have to handle the doves.
No, the Beit Shammai said you physically need to touch them.
Right, and Beit Hillel says it. Oh, it says it's sufficient just to stand and designate.
Stand and designate.
Okay, all right.
Point on your finger and you
okay,
say.
Okay, all right. I now I see.
So,
I'm sorry, I missed
Beit Shammai savrei, you need to touch them in advance before the holiday, because if you just designated them, you just said this pair over there is going to be the pair I'm going to use tomorrow, you may change your mind. And if you change your mind, for example, you take them, you look at them, they're so pretty, they're so cool, they're too small, they're so there, and you change your mind, and then you're in violation of the holidays because you are carry them for not necessary reason. You're allowed to do that if you need it as food, otherwise you're not, it's muktzeh, you can carry them. So
you have to physically touch them?
According to Beit Shammai, yes, you have to physically touch them.
I misread the second part. I'm sorry. I thought it said it was not sufficient to just stand there and designate it. Are they saying it is? No, I thought Beit Hillel also was saying it's not sufficient to just point them out, but they're saying it is sufficient. I misread it.
So Beit Shammai require a person to physically, and they have a very rational reason for that. They feel that otherwise you can change your mind and then you're in violation. Versus if you take it, you physically move them, you take them, you move them in advance, then we are not concerned that he may change his mind during the holiday. Beit Hillel savrei lo gazrinan. We are not concerned about changing mind. Aval bebrecha shniya, however, the pair that comes, the second, as we explained, and those who followed, l'divrei hakol, both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel said, בעומד ואומר זה וזה אני נוטל סגיה. So in other words, now we differentiate between the first pair and the rest, because from the second one and onward, both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel said, in order to avoid a violation of muktzeh, something that's set aside, it's enough to point it out in advance without physically touching. Now we elaborate and explain each mindset. According to Beit Hillel, what's the reason to say just standing far and said this and that I'm taking? So it's enough to say I'm going to use this dove cob for tomorrow, the Meiri said, without using a specific dove. אני נוטה למחר, וכי תאימה בית הלל לית לו ברירה, so you may think that Beit Hillel hold not a bרירה. So let's elaborate, because we many times explain the concept of bרירה, just for those who not so familiar or not remember. Okay, אין ברירה, or יש ברירה, meaning, אין ברירה. An example, someone who brings something from the kutim, those people that we have an issue with tithing, that issue of trust. So they basically, we explain that you need to do afrasha merosh, you need to declare in advance that before Shabbat, Erev Shabbat, you take this and you tighten it. Now, if it's too close, so or you don't have the vessel, so you said this 1/10 is to the north. For the first maaser, first tithe, this 1/10 is to south, second tithe, and then after Shabbat you take the tithe. So they said huvrar lemafriya. It's understand in advance that this is true magdola. Let's go another example. Let's say if you do something in advance, and it's in your mind, then you follow certain actions. So up to that moment, no one knows what you have in your mind. The moment that you put an action, it retroactively understands that that was in your mind. So the difference between ein brera, meaning we do not go by the original setup mindset, versus logically yesh brera, which is we consider your mindset, it's the discussion here. Beit Hillel hold that even at the eve of Yom Tov, meaning before the festival occurred, you can point it out, even you do not designate clearly which pair of doves you're going to use, but generally speaking, looking at them and saying, I'm going to use something in the dovekov, it's enough, because they hold bedoraita, as far as the biblical is concerned, ein brera. The only idea of brera is rabbinic, so therefore the idea is, according to Beit Hillel, it's enough. Others who said en brera, you cannot have a retroactive act in advance, meaning the idea that you selecting these specific doves during the festival is a problematic. Why? Because since it wasn't clearly specified in advance, all the dovekov, it's basically muktzeh, it's set aside, and you cannot use any one of them. So in other words, the whole concept of brera, meaning if you do not retroactively set up clearly, unequivocally, the specific pair, those who said ein brera, meaning you cannot have a retroactive act, then you enter the domain of muktzeh and violation of the festival. Now, so basically, what's the problem? Beit Hillel required to have specific dove before Yom Tov, because otherwise you have an issue of violation. So now you see here, the question is it contradicted what we said earlier? Why they need to say in advance, ze veze ani notel, this one and that one I'm going to take. Vehatnan, this is a well-known Mishnah in Tractate Aholot, chapter 7. Beit Hillel hold the opposite way. Here you see en brera, over there yesh brera.
Over there,
meaning in Tractate Aholot.
Oh, Aholot, okay.
So they said as follows: Hamet babayit velo ptachim harbe. You have a corpse in the house, and the house has many entrances. Now, to refresh our memory, if you are in the property, in a house, and there is a deceased, there is a corpse in the house, anybody who's under that roof automatically render ritual impurity. Anyone who under the roof, meaning it's called Tum'at Ohel, the ritual impurity of quote-unquote tent, which apply to any property. Now, the distance makes no difference. As long as you're under that roof, let's say this is the building where we are here, it's a huge one, but as long as you are under the same roof, it's basically the same rendering ritual impurity. Here is the issue. If you have that house many entrances, and we do not have a clear knowledge which door we're going to use in order to take the deceased to the burial site, kulan tme'in, meaning all the vessels that in that domain automatically render ritual impurity. Even those open areas around the doors, they're still impure. Rashi tells us that that's what we call halacha leMoshe miSinai. That's one of those halachot applies. The sages say that since you are not sure which entrance you're going to use, so therefore all the domain are ritually impure, including the door's domain. Niftach echad mehem. However, if one of the doors in that building are open, and that happened after the person passed, so they said, Hu tameh vechulan teorim, which means that a section, small section of the open door in that area, that render ritual impurity, other doors are pure. Why? Because now you're dealing with Beirah, we have a retroactive understanding that the designation of the area of the evacuation of the body, meaning the place that you're planning to remove the corpse and take it out of the building, now we understand that that was designation area to take it. So therefore, the other doors are free from rendering ritual impurity, because now we all understand what happened originally, that that was the area for the deceased. They used that area as the door to remove. Now, now what happened is, if, let's say, we are talking here about funeral home people or family members, they're planning to take the deceased toward a specific door. Sabah al-khir akhuya. Specific door. או בחלון, שיש בו 4 על 4. So now we enter to another important discussion. When we talking about the law of ritual impurity, we have by halacha area that is called window 4x4 handbreadth, which means in those days the houses, you see it in all European, Eastern European places, they have something like that. They have funeral homes or places that use to remove the deceased for many reasons. They, instead of using the regular doorway, they're using a window. And by halacha, window that can carry deceased and remove the deceased from the location that he passed to the place of burial has to be a window by halacha, minimum measure of 4x4 handbreadth. So now what happened is, after the person passed, they move it, so even we do not yet use that access. In other words, the deceased is before us, and we did not use the certain access of getting out of that domain. But since that's the access we're planning to use, they said, matzelet al kol haptachin kulan. So the moment that you have, for example, this, let's call it section A of the door to remove the body, or specific window, that basically, quote unquote, rescue other spot from ritual impurity. Now, usually the Kesef Mishnah said we do not use a window for that purpose. Even during the Shoah, it was incidences that people use windows. But in general term, we do not use windows for evacuation of a corpse. Yet, for our discussion, which is the retroactive understanding, something that's set up in advance, the moment that you designated one of those entrances, then all the others are free from rendering ritual impurity. That's the opinion of Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai אומרים, והוא, in other words, that's matching Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai אומרים, והוא שחישב, I'm sorry, no, That's the first opinion. Beit Shammai אמרו שחישב להוציאו עד שלא ימות המת. Beit Shammai said that that's apply only if a person set up that plan in advance until the person passing. In other words, let's call name. Let's say the person who passed, his name is Reuven. And Shimon, it's his friend who is basically the guy that's supposed to take the body and move it from that domain. So Beit Shammai said, if Shimon, while Reuven was still alive, he made up his mind that the moment Reuven will pass, he is going to use a certain exit to remove the corpse from that exit, then it's fine that the rest of the entrances are pure. But if it was not set in advance before passing, we have the issue of ritual impurity for all different accesses. ובית הלל אומרים, אף מי שימות המת. Even the decision Shimon made happened later, after Reuven passed, it's fine. So what is depend? That's depend upon the discussion of Beira, which means Beira, it's back. According to Beit Shammai, they said, Ein Brera, we do not hold this retroactive act, which means the decision to take the deceased toward a certain entrance happened after the person's passed. And that decision has to come up before a person passing, otherwise we do not accept that as the only area of rendering ritual impurity. Versus Beit Hillel said no, even the decision to take the deceased toward a certain section, certain area of the building happened after his passing. We said, Huvrar lemafreya, now it's discovered to us what was originally in his mind. Now we try to juxtapose that disputation to our discussion in regards to those doves. It means over there you see Beit Hillel hold that it's yesh brera. We can accept the late decision as a retroactive act. And now the question is, why according to Beit Hillel in our discussion in Mishnah it's enough to say in advance, from here, from this dove cove, I'm going to take this pair, and it appears that now, even it's during the holidays, we understand during the festival that that was his intent, even it happened later. So the Gemara responded and said, Ha'it marala. The truth is, Beit Hillel hold the opposite, which is Ein Brera, did not accept it. They, if it was not a statement in advance, did not accepted decision there, doing the action. Ha'it marala, Amar Rabba, when it happens in that circumstance of deceased, Rabbah said the decision to take the deceased, the corpse, toward a specific entrance applies letaheret haptachim mikan ulehaba. Guess what? It's not applying to what happened earlier. It happens from this moment and onward. Meaning, Mr. Reuven passed away. Since he passed away and it wasn't clear which entrance we're going to use, everything is impure. But now, since Shimon made the decision to take Reuven, the deceased, toward entrance for, let's call it entrance A, from now, from this moment and onward, the rest of the entrance it's sufficient. Which means the disputation is if machshava, if you thought, if your reflection is sufficient to be accepted or not. So v'chen amar Rabbi Yoshaya, he said according to Beit Hillel the decision to take the corpse toward specific entrance letaher ptachim mikan ule'aba, from now and onward. Mikan ule'aba ein, from now and onward it's fine. Lemafreya lo, but some vessels that under those entrances are rendering ritual impure. Why? Because you do not say that this retroactive act applies in advance. In other words, he made a decision, Shimon make a decision now. Let's say he was standing at 10 o'clock next to Reuven. Reuven was alive. Shimon did not make any decisions. And there are three different entrances, A, B, and C. Now it's 10:20. Reuven passed. Shimon now decided at 10:25 to take the body toward entrance A and move it to the funeral home. So we said so far that what happened is that up to this point everything is rendering ritual impure. Now it's 10:30. Since Reuven made a decision to use only entrance A, now we understand retroactively that entrance B and C from this point and onward are not rendering ritually impure. But you cannot say that that was a retroactive act that applies solely to A, because the decision of the A happened only at 10:25. Rava Amar. Rava goes in a different direction to explain the contradiction in the point of Beit Hillel. And he said, Le'olam le'mafreya. Basically, according to Beit Hillel, those entrances are ritually impure in a retroactive act. Why? Because they hold midrabanan by rabbinic yesh brera. We can hold the retroactive act. Vehacha hainu tama. From the moment that the person passed up to this point, it's pure. It said, we juxtaposed to our discussion in the Mishnah. What will happen in the Mishnah? We said that the dove cove, you need to make a declaration before Yom Tov. And what do you say before the festival? From here, from section B. And that dove cove, I'm going to take, you don't touch it, you just look and point it out. So, meaning, you do not make a final decision what specific pair you're going to take. You just pointed out, Dilma metaltel v'shavik, metaltel v'shavik, v'ka metaltel midei v'lo chazelei. Oh, guess what happened? That's so common. People go, and, it's remind me, no offense. I'm sorry to say, but I never go with my daughters or my wife to a clothing store. I always give them the credit card. You make up your mind. Never buy with them shoes, never buy with them clothing. Why? Because they go to a store and it takes forever. And this one is not good enough, that one is not good enough. How do I look? Do I look French? Do I look Hawaiian? Do I look whatever? Drive you Meshuggah. It's not for me. Right? So what happened here, the same guy, he goes to that dove cove doing Yom Tov, he designated certain action, he changed his mind. This one, look at this dove, it's so pretty, I can't take it. It's too small. Look at her eyes, I can't take it. I'm not eating it, this one. And he starts changing and switching, and meanwhile he's in violation of Muktzeh. Is violation of the principle on Yom Tov that you're not moving something that is not need for food. So, according to Beit Hillel, since it's mitnagesh be'isur, it's contradicted to something that's prohibited, you take one dove and you leave it, and you take another one, like the clothing. Take one and take. Sometimes, you can. I don't know about other people, but for me it's like torture to go to those stores. I just can't take it, to sit for a half hour, 1 hour, and right, to change as another clothing, and nothing is good. Eventually they come out with something. I don't know how they get it, but that's the way it is, right? So with those doves, a person can drive you Meshuggah. Every 2 minutes he changes his mind. So this one doesn't want for a million reasons. So now, meanwhile, while he's moving all these doves, he's in violation of Muktzeh. So they said, V'ha'amar be'omed v'omer ze v'ze ani notel saga. Wait a second, what we said earlier? It's enough for this guy to stand there and say, this and that, I'm going to take. So now you contradicted yourself. You said earlier that's enough to point it out. Yeah. Now you said it's not. So the Gemara response said, Hanemile me'erev Yom Tov. So I explained in my book, there is a beautiful Rashi here. Rashi said, Hanemile me'erev Yom Tov, klomar, heicha de'adam me'erev Yom Tov. So Rashi tried to tell us that it's a chiluk yesodi, it's a very important foundation if a person make a clear statement in advance or doesn't make a clear statement in advance. And that clear statement, I don't have the whole time to go over the explanation, but the decision was made. Then if you look at those dogs, this one is fat, this one it's too, because let's face it, if those, I'm not eating them, but those people who want them for food, for sure the fat and it makes sense to use it as a meat. Otherwise, it's just a little dessert. So, so those that he didn't set up in advance, it's basically a muktzeh, and he cannot carry other dogs. Aval 10b, aval biyom tov asur. So Rashi said, כשבא לבררן ביום טוב, כלומר שלא ברר דבריו מבעוד יום. So here they said, on the contrary, during the festival, as sometimes those who seem to him to be fat once will be found to be thin. Since he is not clear, that's the reason I think Rashi said, he's not clear in advance before the holidays. And he figured out tomorrow, I search all of them and I make decisions. And it turns that those who are fat turn to be skinny. And those who are thin turn to be fat. So now we're going to use those he did not intend. So here the issue is, do you have the concern of carrying muktzeh during the festival or not? So why, now you see why Beit Hillel requested the person before the festival to point it out in advance and said, Ze veze ani notel, this one I'm going to take, and not enough to say mikan ani notel, from here on I'm taking, but specifically, Hiname zim din mishtakhalu khushim v'shaveklu, that he leave, ve'at lamnu im simchat yom tov. So guess what? He backed off. And he turned, he said, this one is too skinny, too thin, I'm not going to eat. And then the choice of Yom Tov is to eat meat. And then this you can say even according to Beit Shammai. Because what we said at the Shita Mekubetz, he said that in Berecha Shniya, and from the second pair and onward, you need to say, this one I'm taking. You pointed out, and it's not enough to say, from here I'm taking. So it means that Beit Shammai hold that ein brera, you cannot have the retroactive act, and if it's not specified in advance, that's the way Shita Mekubetzet explained. If it's not specified in advance, clearly they are all muktzeh, and they are all cannot be touched. They are all prohibited. Now, the next Mishnah dealing with the halachot of setting up those dogs and differentiate between if we set it up in advance or not. In other words, you have on purpose, the Mishnah used the color to very clearly crystallize the difference between if he pointed out on yanea or he physically moved them. So they said, Zimen shchorim umatza levanim. He set up what? The pair that are black. And all of a sudden, he turned there in the holiday and it was white, and vice versa. Levanim umatza shchorim. The eve of the festival, he designated white, and now they are black. Which means you need to set up zimun, set up in advance before the holidays. Shnayim umatza shlosha. He planned 2, and all of a sudden he entered there, and there are 3. Alright? So now is the problem. He is not recognized the two that he set up. So they said asurim, you cannot use it. Shlosha u'matza shnayim mutarim. If he said 3, and all of a sudden there are 2, so he can use it. Why? Because you assume that one of them left, and these 2 stay there. So because you can't say the Shita Mekubetzet said it. You cannot say that it's all of a sudden new. You have to say that just one of them left. Now, בתוך הקן ומצא לפני הקן, what happening is there are, soon the Gemara explained that there are certain doves that quote unquote allowed or get in the nest, and there are others who can stay outside, put their feet on that branch, but they don't sit inside the nest. So if he set up those pair that were inside the nest, and now he has discovered them outside, asurim. Even usually the Meiri said that they come out of their nests, but since they are not in the location that he designated them, it may happen that they are different. It's not the pair that he designated. Im en sham elahem, but if it was eve of the festival and it was only that 2 pair, harelu mutarim. Why? Because you assume even they are not inside the nest, it's the same one that he saw yesterday. The Gemara said pshita, all of that come on, it's obvious. This is the situation. He set up both in the same nest. It was black and white in the other nest. והשכימו מצא שחורים בלבנים ולבנים עם שחורים. Guess what? It turned that they are basically swing. The blacks move to the other one and the white move to the other one. They just switch. מהו דתימה הנה אינו נינו ויתפוך יתפוך, which means you may think that they just switch and therefore they're not muktzeh. כמשמלן, the Mishnah tells us, הנח אזדו לעלמא ואנה חרינא נינו. Guess what happened? Those you designated, they flew out, they're no longer there, and now you have others. So as long as you're not concerned about it, that's different. But if you're concerned that maybe it's not the one you designated in advance, so there is issue, you cannot carry them. למה מסייע לרבי חנינא? ואמר רבי חנינא רוב וקרוב הלך אחר הרוב. Rabbi Hanina said, when you have a situation that you're not clear, you're not sure what the identity of certain item, so you go by if the majority follow one way, but you have an issue of close to a source that indicate in a different way, you have to follow the majority. So it means you have to go, the majority of them is not in this dove cove, so therefore it may happen that there are others. Imagine if there are many dove cove in the area, and it's a serious possibility that one pair flew to another and then they swing around, they change the location. So the Gemara rejected, said, Daf achana meidaf. Daf meaning, when you look at those dove cove, they have many times those little bench, a little ledge that they are standing. So in a sense, it's hard for us to know the whole dynamics, but it turns sometimes that for the best understanding that there are some allowed and some just sit outside on that ledge and not enter inside. And therefore the Mishnah is not follow this principle of Rabbi Hanina. Now we learn in the Mishnah also, שניים ומצא שלושה אסורים. he designated 2. And guess what happened? All of a sudden, the next day, when it's a festival, he found 3. So you cannot use it. So, manavshach. Gemarrah said, what do you mean? So I explained in my book, here Rashi said, manavshach, said, if achrinaninu, ha'achrinaninu. פירוש הדמתנינו, כלומר, אחרי אסורים למען נפשך להתירן. So Rashi, and I saw it also in the Rashba, the Mishnah tells us that if there are 2, he designated 2, and then there are 3, so if all these 3 are different, and not the 2 that he have yesterday, so it's a muktzeh. Ve'ilo achrinaninu, that even not all of them are new one, they still prohibited. You have one that mixture with the others. So Tosfot asks a question. He says, "Velibatel beruba." You go by the majority, and it's only 1 against 2. So he explained 2 explanations, and he said, "The baalei chaim lo batle." When it's come to animals, you cannot go by the majority. Or another explanation, "Nama אבל דבר שיש לו מתירים לאחר יום טוב." והכל דבר שיש לו מתירים אפילו באלף לא בטל. So this is the second תירוץ. זה דבר שיש לו מתירים. Anyway, 3 ומצא 2 מותרים. If he order before the holiday 3, for the first one is 2, so he can, my tama. What's the reason? היינו נינו ואחד מן היה זל לעלמא. So you assume that these were 2 that he have yesterday, and the third one disappeared. So Tosfot said that usually the bird, the dove, is not leaving the nest. למה מתניתין רבי ולא רבנן? נתניה, הניח מנה ומצא 200. I wish to all of us. This we're talking about money of the second type. So they said if one left 100, for those Talmudic time is zuzim, the money of the second type in the box, and all of a sudden he come back, boom, there are 200. So what did he do? So they said, chulin, maaser shenim, moravim ze bazeh. So you have here a mixture of something that is unconsecrated with something that is sacred, which is the second type. So divrei Rabbi v'chachamim akol chulin, everything is, since it's mixed, so he said that it's all unconsecrated. הניח 200 ומצא מנה. If we left 200, now he is only 100. מנה מונח ומנה מוטל, דברי רבי. So only 1. וחכמים אומרים הכל חולין. The sage said it's all unconsecrated. So that's basically contradicted to what we said. אפילו תאמר רבנן היתמר עלה, רבי יוחנן ורבי אלעזר דאמרי רבה ושנה גוזלות, הואיל ועשויים לדות. So he said you cannot compare the two, because he said that flooding are different since they are typically hop from one place to another, so therefore it's possible that one of them escaped. However, the money pouch cannot move on its own and must have been taken by someone, so you cannot compare the two. So the Gemara said, so what's the reason Rabbi Yochanan or Rabbi Elazar needs to go? Shani goes out that the reason it's because they typically hop. ויתמר לה דאי רבי יוחנן ורבי אלעזר חד אמר בשני כיסים מחלוקת, אבל בכיס אחד דברי הכל חולין. One said that if you have the two punches is the dispute, but if it's one punch, everyone said that it's unconsecrated. ואחד אמר בכיס אחד מחלוקת, that the two type of tithe was in one punch, אבל בשני כיסים דברי הכל מנה מונח ומנה מוטל. So if it's a two, everyone agree that 100 dinar of tithe left and 100 dinar has been removed. So now the Gemara said בישלמה דאמר בשני כיסי מחלוקת היינו ישתרשלו הרי האחה שהנגוזות you need to use this answer of the harp to respond, because those pair are different than the coin, because usually they are harp אלא למאן דאמר בכיס אחד מחלוקת, the one who said that one punch is a disputation, אבל בשני כיסים דברי הכל מנה מונח ומנה מוטל, השתא למה לשינוי העלה. So why you need why you need to answer what's the difference between halacha and the case of flagellings? So they said, Amar b'shnei kisin lo pligei. You just said that did not disagree with regard to two separate pouches. And therefore, they certainly do not disagree in the case of flagelling. So Amar Rabba she'acha begozlot mekusharim v'chisim mekusharim askinan. You know what's happened here? We're talking about them that they are totally tied together. If they tie together, and the same apply to the money, the pounds, they tie together. So he said, Gozalot menatche adadi. When this fledgling can release themselves from each other when they're moving. Kisin lo menatche adadi. But those pounds, they not move from one. So the one said that those pair, we found them untied. It's because if they are tied, it's clear that the Pnei Yehoshua said, it's clear that he set it up in advance. That if you tell me that someone tied it has to be before the Yom Tov, before the festival. So then it's match what the sages said in the Mishnah. V'Rabbi, you hold that if you have these two pounds together and then he found one, Amar lach kisin name zimnin, he said that those pounds too sometimes the Aleph 11 the mitakel kitraihu, that the knot becomes worn and untied. So it's possible that one person took one of them, but not two of them. Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 497. The doves of the dovecote and the loft are considered muktzeh. The same applied to birds nesting into fairs and like. One must designate them and say before the festival clearly, I will take this one and that one. And in addition, one must either leave a sign of them or remember distinguishing feature. One may do so even by means of a non-verbal declaration. That's Shulchan Aruch Harav. But the point is, you don't have to shake them. However, it's not enough merely to say, I'll take a pair of doves from here. All of this halachot is basically follow Beit Hillel. So we derive from all the discussion of the Breira. Also, Tum'at HaPtachim, we talk about the ritual impurity. That's Rambam, Ilchot Tumat Hamet, chapter 7. If there is a corpse in a house that has many entrances, all of which are locked, they are all ritually impure, and anyone sitting under an entrance is rendered impure with ritual impurity imparted by a corpse. If one of the entrances is opened, or if a decision has been made to remove the corpse through one of the entrances, including a window 4x4 handbreadth in size, this spares all the other entrance from ritual impurity, even if the decision was made after the person died. That's basically follow Beit Hillel. We talk about a Breira, so that's Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 497. If one designated a black fledgling on the eve of the festival and discovered white one in the place when he came to take them on the festival, they are prohibited. However, this halacha is different if one designated two and found three. If one designated three and found two, or if one designated black one and next to white one and found the black ones in the place where the white ones. In all these cases, the ruling is as follows. If you recognize the ones he designated, he may take them. If not, they are prohibited. So this applies in a case where either there are other dovecotes within 50 cubits, or the fledgling can fly a little. That's basically the opinion of the Rabbah, as the Mishnah stated. We talk also about a shlosha u'matzah shnayim. If one designated 3 dogs and found 2, they are permitted even if all 3 were initially tied together. That's Shulchan Aruch Harav and the Ramah. The Taz said that whenever the doves are found in a different state from the way one left them, then they are prohibited. But the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim 497 elaborate on that. We basically said that all the idea of hachana is crucial. That's one of the reasons we are doing a ruvei tavshilin, because when we're doing this hachana, you save yourself from all those problems of muktzeh during the festival.
Boyachem leshuloim alachai yeshuloim malachai